Hi friends, today, we bring you an extraordinary and heart-touching story recorded by one of the most respected European historians, Edward Gibbon, in his monumental work The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Volume V, Chapter 50. In this book, Gibbon describes the daily life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with deep admiration and honesty. He writes, "The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, disdained not the occupations of a domestic life. He kindled the fire, swept the floor, milked the ewes, and mended with his own hands his shoes and his garment. Disdaining the pomp of royalty, he lived and ate like a simple Arab soldier. On solemn occasions, he entertained his companions with hospitable plenty, but in his domestic life, many weeks would pass without the smoke of a fire appearing in the house of the Prophet, peace be upon him." Edward Gibbon, The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Volume 5, Chapter 50. Now, let us discuss in detail the words written by Edward Gibbon, and understand their deeper meaning. In the heart of the 18th century, when Europe was bursting with enlightenment and reason, one of the greatest historians of all time, Edward Gibbon, sat at his desk in London and began to write a monumental work. His masterpiece, The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, stretched across 6 volumes and shaped the modern understanding of history. But within those pages, amidst emperors, conquests, and revolutions, Gibbon paused, to speak of a man who had no crown, no palace, and no army of marble statues. He spoke of Muhammad, peace be upon him, the messenger of God, and with the honesty of a true historian, Gibbon wrote words that would echo through centuries. The good sense of Muhammad despised the pomp of royalty. The apostle of God submitted to the menial offices of the family. He kindled the fire, swept the floor, milked the ewes, and mended with his own hands his shoes and garments. Edward Gibbon was no ordinary writer. Born in 1737 in England, he was a product of the Enlightenment, an era that valued logic, evidence, and intellectual courage. He was not a religious preacher, nor a missionary. He was a skeptic, a man of reason, and yet, when he studied the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he found in it a greatness that reason could not deny. His purpose was not to glorify Islam. It was to describe history truthfully. But truth, when spoken sincerely, has its own power, and in the Prophet of Islam, Gibbon found a figure of such moral strength, simplicity, and wisdom, that even a non-believer could not help but admire him. To understand Gibbon's admiration, we must look back at the world in which Muhammad, peace be upon him, lived. 7th century Arabia was a land divided by tribes, pride, and superstition. Idols filled the Kaaba, and injustice ruled the deserts. The weak were crushed, women had no rights, and the poor were forgotten. Out of that darkness rose a man, unlettered, orphaned, yet destined to become the greatest reformer in human history, a man who would teach that all men are equal before God. That mercy is strength, and that truth is greater than blood or tribe. Gibbon, studying this transformation, saw not just a prophet, but a revolution of ethics and civilization itself. Gibbon wrote that the Prophet of Islam despised luxury and the pomp of kings. He was not impressed by the glitter of gold or the throne of rulers. At home, Muhammad, peace be upon him, was gentle, humble, and self-reliant. He would light his own fire, sweep the floor, and mend his clothes. He milked his own goats, and when something broke, he repaired it himself. He never demanded special treatment. If he was walking with his companions, no one could tell which of them was the prophet, because he looked and lived like them. He ate simple food, dates, barley, bread, and water. Sometimes, weeks would pass without smoke rising from his kitchen, and yet, his home was filled with light, not of wealth, but of peace. This was what Gibbon found remarkable. That a man who could command armies and inspire nations chose instead a life of humility. To Gibbon, Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not just a religious figure, but a leader of extraordinary vision. He united a people who had known nothing but war and vengeance. he built a society based on justice, charity, and discipline. He did not rule with tyranny. He ruled with compassion. He forgave his enemies when he could have destroyed them. He shared his food with the poor, sat among slaves and free men alike, and taught that the best among people are those who serve others. When victory came to him, Muhammad, peace be upon him, entered Mecca not as a conqueror but as a servant of God, his head bowed in gratitude. Such moments, Gibbon noted, revealed the true grandeur of his soul. Gibbon observed another remarkable aspect of the Prophet's character, his rejection of extreme asceticism. He was not a monk hiding in a cave, nor a recluse shunning the world. He lived among people, married, worked, smiled, and guided. He taught that holiness is not in abandoning the world, but in living righteously within it. As Gibbon wrote, disdaining the penance and merit of a hermit, he observed without effort or vanity the abstemious diet of an Arab soldier. That was his strength, moderation, balance, and humanity. Imagine, as Gibbon did, the messenger of God sitting with his family, mending his clothes, or milking his goat. He helped in household chores. He spoke kindly to servants. When someone entered his home, they did not find a throne, they found a man smiling, simple, and content. In a world where kings sat on golden chairs, Muhammad, peace be upon him, sat on the ground. Where rulers sought praise, he taught humility, and where power corrupted others, it purified him. Even in his final days, he had no palace, no treasure. He left behind a lamp, a mat, and a world forever changed. Edward Gibbon saw in Muhammad, peace be upon him, not the founder of a religion only, but the founder of a civilization, a man whose moral authority reshaped nations. A teacher whose followers numbered not by bloodline, but by belief. In Gibbon's view, the Prophet's success was not a miracle of swords, but a triumph of character. Without deceit, without coercion, he inspired men to faith, discipline, and mercy. His law, his example, and his message would guide millions long after the empires of Rome and Persia turned to dust. And so, even the rational historian had to confess, there was something divine in the simplicity of that man. Centuries have passed since Gibbon wrote those words. Empires have risen and fallen, but the light of Muhammad, peace be upon him, still shines across the world. It is the light of humility, justice, and service. When we read Gibbon today, we see more than a historian's admiration. We see a testimony that truth can be seen by any heart that is honest, for the Prophet's greatness does not depend on faith alone. It is written in the pages of human history, and as Gibbon's pen bore witness, he kindled the fire, swept the floor, milked the ewes, and mended with his own hands his shoes and garments. A historian's observation, a timeless lesson for mankind.